I am very fortunate to be the one helping to lead this initiative on behalf of the city. So thank you all for attending today, and I hope you find this session informative. I would also like to thank our partners in this initiative that are here with us today. So first of all, the Sustainable Economies Law Center, you're going to hear from their team today. So I can't thank them enough for all their hard work in making this session happen. Also, Democracy at Work Institute has been instrumental, and also Project Equity. I would also like to briefly acknowledge one of our city council members is joining us today, Council Member Kevin Park. So I want to thank him for joining us today, and also just for his continued support throughout this effort. I don't see any other council members on right now, but I know our mayor, Mayor Gilmore, might be joining us a little bit later as well. So I just wanted to thank them for their continued support. The City of Santa Clara is pleased to be offering a series of educational webinars about the worker cooperative business model and the benefits it brings to our local workforce and the business community as a whole. Through the summer, and I think you can see it on your screen there now, we'll be hosting a series of these, which actually are going to dive deeper into what factors businesses need to consider as they're thinking about launching a worker cooperative. If this is your first session and you're a City of Santa Clara business, we have been hosting more kind of a broader overview sessions. And if this is your first one and you've missed those larger overview sessions, please feel free to visit our website, santaclaraca.gov/worker cooperative, and you can access all the recordings of the previous webinars, and this one will be up later this week. Again, we hope you enjoy this session. Please reach out with any questions. There'll be time for questions during this session as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to our team at Sustainable Economies Law Center. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Robin. It's a pleasure to be here. We're really excited about the work that's been going on in Santa Clara. And shouts out to Yasi and the Work Coalition, Kirk, and all of the other folks who have been bringing us to this point. My name is Gregory Jackson. I am a staff attorney at the Law Center. I'm also a co-founder of Repaired Nations, a project I'm very excited about and getting more excited about by the day. Today I'll be talking about entity formation for California worker cooperatives. And so what that will mean, well, first I'll talk a little bit about the Sustainable Economies Law Center and what we do. Then we'll get into some of the entity options for folks seeking to create worker cooperatives. And lastly, we'll have some time for a Q&A. The Sustainable Economies Law Center is this awesome amalgamation of amazing people and amazing projects that span the how would I say, that spans the all of the different alternative economies, or maybe the ways our economy should be. And so we help with the legal aspects. We have a legal cafe, the Resilient Communities Legal Cafe, that you're welcome to come by, drop in your appointments. There are tons of projects like the Radical Real Estate Law School, our compost work, energy work, people power solar. So much has come out of the Law Center since its inception a little more than 10 years ago. I'm really happy to be doing this work and sharing with you. This webinar will be recorded, so just want to give you all a proper notice if you're turning on your cameras or unintentionally unmuting yourself. So essentially, we're going to be talking about what legal entities are and the factors you should consider when looking at legal entities, and some of the steps to take when doing that formation, in addition to some resources that'll help you along the way. Sometimes it feels like there's just so much to learn and do, trying to build a business, learn how to work with each other. And the Law Center has been trying to create guides, more are on their way. So it's always great to check in at thesup.org, see what's happening, what new things have come out, the wealth of knowledge that's already there, like Think Outside the Box, Legal Guide to Conversions, and handbooks. So cooperatives are many things. Essentially, they are member-controlled, member-operated, and member-benefiting. But when you get down to like the brass tacks, they are a tax category Subchapter T in the IRS code. It's a type of corporation here in California. California worker cooperatives have their own statute. It's really like a set of principles that folks who aren't legally cooperatives can still uphold and move forward. Before we get into the law, or maybe as we're getting into the law, this slide is something that a coworker of mine, Ricardo, picked up, which is kind of showing that, I'm sorry. This slide, I really just wanted to, I guess, bring our attention to the fact that oftentimes what appears to be on the surface isn't actually, what it is as it goes further down. I think we've all been gaining more understanding that, some of the laws we have a very racist or suppressionist past. And some of the practices that our businesses take are in that same vein. And the awesome thing I love about cooperatives is that it gives people the opportunities to come together and build their own micro economies, micro societies that we can then pilot and show to the world that there's a better way possible. As you're moving forward and working with attorneys doing this work, it's also important to realize that some people aren't necessarily coming from a cooperative mindset, and you're going to want to shop around, look around for relevant experience, provide information up front. This one is funny. Don't expect yes or no answers because as you'll see, there are often exceptions to the exceptions and additions you can get if there are certain prerequisites made. So, but don't be afraid to ask the questions and please do your own legal research. Much of what's out there is available for everyone. Before even starting a legal entity, it's important to do some preliminary business planning, or at least being able to answer these questions pretty thoroughly. Why are you starting a business? What product or service will you offer? Why organize as a co-op business? What's behind that? What is the business model? How is it going to make money? Something every business has to do. Making sure there's a market for your business or doing that research to show. And then, figuring out if you can actually get a share of that market that's available. So, legal entities, these are the structures and rules under which a business operates. And these can be general stock corporations, worker cooperative corporations, LLCs, and other things. I mentioned the resilient community legal cafes that the Law Center puts on. And I think this is where this little cartoon came from. One of my coworkers, Janelle, is a great cartoonist. She says, sometimes clients say, we're leaning towards a cooperative, but then someone said we should do a B Corp. Another person said we should consider a C Corp, but we kind of want to keep it simple and do an LLC. But we should also incorporate in Delaware maybe because someone told us. And she realized when parsing through this information and trying to help people understand the different ingredients to your legal entity and the way you're doing business, kind of equates to a smashed up piece of cake or a piece of cake in general. And so the internal structures, the financial structures, the governance structures, operations and policies, those are all the ingredients you're stirring up to make the cake. The entity, that's the cake itself, the kind of cake you chose. Whereas the tax status is the icing on top of that cake. So you can kind of mix and match cakes and icings and etc. So you can imagine that there are many possibilities to go. I'll be talking about kind of the baseline things, but the possibilities can be endless sometimes. B Corps, just to kind of tie a loose end, B Corps are like the sprinkles on top of a cake because it's not an entity and it's not a legal status. It's really you doing something so another company can say that you're approved and that you are a good company. So let's go to the next one. So it could be mix and match, as I said. And so the cakes, the entity types, we'll talk about sole proprietors, LLCs, partnerships, LLCs, corporations of all kind, which can include nonprofit, general stock, cooperative, and then the icings that go with those. Because as I'll talk about later, an LLC can be taxed as a cooperative corporation if you do it right. And so, yes, the cakes are what you form at entity level for any type of entity. And then, the tax status is something you have to deal with the federal government and the IRS. And so for those of you all who are thinking about doing some business, and then you start doing business right away without necessarily filing anything, you're going to be considered a sole proprietor, kind of like magic, poof, because legally, as soon as you start doing business on your own, you're a sole proprietor, unless you prove otherwise or file any of the articles that you need. And the same happens when you're doing business activities as with two or more people. The law will likely automatically consider you a partnership, almost like magic. You might not have intended to create a partnership, but that's what the law will classify you all as. And so by default, that means that a sole proprietor or a partnership is going to have unlimited liability. That's the way the law works. And that means that if something happens along the course of business and the business gets sued, both the business and that person are responsible or liable potentially for all of it, whatever they got. It's helpful in that you avoid taxes, that $800 minimum franchise tax that you have to submit to the FTB. You're taxed as a partnership, so it's kind of included with your 1040s and stuff like that. And there isn't much corporate formalities or things you have to do in terms of mission alignment, mission formation, and getting all of those things together. You can just start. But there is also this thing about unlimited liability, which can be, challenging for some people. And so what you're going to want to think about as you're creating your business is, how risky are your business activities? And maybe not, you're going to have to probably come outside of your head and try and think in the head of someone else. But, the activities of a designing cooperative will be different than the activities of a food truck, which is different than the activities of a cooperative grocery store. And so, when you're trying to get insurance and workers' comp, et cetera, there's going to be, different ways that you're viewed. Limited liability doesn't mean that you can't get sued, but it does support in that, if something happens, you don't have to sell the farm because there was a mistake. It can be limited in some ways, but you should always have insurance because, yeah, there are ways to pierce the corporate veil, as it's called, which is the limited liability shield that people are receiving when they file for an LLC or a corporation of some kind. And so this shield helps when there's debts that are owed or harm that's caused. They're going to be primarily dealing with the entity, which is considered a person in legal speak. And so whatever the business is, LLC is the one who will have to deal with if someone slips or if there's debts in that business's name. But if it's a partnership or limited life, or if it's a partnership or a sole proprietor, you're not able to do this. Say it wasn't me, it was my company. They're gonna be able to come after you anyway. Things that do get past, I said, the liability shield can be breached in some ways by piercing the corporate veil, but not all the times. If you guarantee the debt personally, that's gonna pass through, as well as if there's negligence or malpractice. So you definitely want limited liability, or at least a lot of people do. You're gonna need insurance either way, but it provides some peace of mind. It also is a vehicle for holding a mission, gathering funds, and those kinds of things. And so when you're considering whether you wanna just, kind of start with the defaults and not have to do very much, you're You might be considering the $800 a year franchise tax. You might be considering the corporate formalities, which I've talked about earlier, things like providing notice for the meetings you're having meetings for both like the board or the members or both, having proper minutes and records. There's just a lot that comes with the responsibility of starting this new entity. Another thing that you're going to want to be considering when figuring out if you're going to start in what kind of entity to start for your business activities is if you want to be an employee of the company, or if you're willing to be an employee of the company, or if you're willing, or if you need or want to be an owner of the company. Corporations or like corporations, even if you are a cooperative owner of a corporation, a cooperative corporation, like oftentimes the regulatory agencies here in California will still want for you to be considered an employee and for the cooperative to have the same, protections for an employee, even though you're like an employee and an owner. Okay, so going back to the cake analogy, after you figure out, we're going to be going through more things. The cake is what we're using to form the entity. You're going to be sending the instructions to the Secretary of State, often called articles of incorporation or organization, to register a corporation or an LLC, unless you're a partnership. And after that point, you get to choose the tax status, which is a little outside the scope of this, but you need to be aware of this because there are some defaults, and then there are some things you're going to want to opt into. Limited liability companies are an entity choice that a lot of folks are considering, sometimes because of the fewer formalities, simpler documentation that it can have over a corporation. I had mentioned earlier, like LLCs can still be taxed as cooperatives, and whether or not they're taxed that way, they can still operate that way. One member, one vote, democratic participation, and those kinds of things. The Law Center has a LLC operating agreement with cartoons in the form of little popsicle sticks. That is really helpful if you want to check something out, I believe. Something to consider with LLCs and employment status. Earlier, I mentioned that cooperatives, if you're starting a cooperative corporation, you're likely going to be considered an employee. Sometimes the people who are seeking to create a cooperative, create some justice in their ecosystem, aren't undocumented or are not documented. And that is another reason why some folks have chosen to opt in to an LLC entity choice, because unlike a corporation, the owners of an LLC are just considered owners, or the members, I should say. Members or owners of an LLC are just considered owners, and they don't have to perform the I-9s. Okay, so LLCs are very, very flexible and can almost do anything other like business entities are doing. But that flexibility is like awesome, but also it makes it so that if a cohort of people are starting a cooperative as an LLC now, there aren't very many protections or restrictions against like demutualization or selling the cooperative or its assets in the future. And so folks who are going in this route are going to want to make sure that they're looking into these kinds of things, and also making sure that their LLC members aren't considered employees because they have sufficient ownership and control. For LLC members, you're going to want to make sure that folks like aren't in a perceived hierarchy that would look like a boss telling someone what to do. Every member is an owner. Members can influence hiring strategies and other major decisions, sharing in profits and losses. These are all things one should be considering when going into the LLC as a cooperative. These LLCs are normally member managed, meaning they'll be taxed like a partnership, and there'll be certain things you'll want in your operating agreement to spell out how that goes. Not only one member, one vote, but the ways that profits are allocated, whether it's by hour or by some other metric. When thinking about corporations, one may think, first general stock corporations, the things we see all over the place. But here in California, there's a few other types. I won't necessarily get into all of them, but there's social purpose corporations, public benefit corporations, mutual benefit corporations, and cooperative corporations. The general stock corporation is the most common. It's owned by shareholders. It's profit driven. There are court cases that speak to the need for general stock corporations to maximize profit over, nearly everything else. And voting power in general stock corporations is directly tied to the amount of shares one has. So one person could have a very outsized influence in these kinds of corporations. There's double taxation here, so both at the entity level and when it's passed through to folks. When thinking about corporations, the members are going to be the shareholders if you're trying to fit a cooperative lens on the general stock corporation. And workers are going to be employees, so there's going to be need to follow employment law and other things of that nature. Really excited to get into California cooperative corporations. It's a special kind of corporation type in the country. Only about 14 or so countries have, or I'm sorry, only about 14 or so states have cooperative statutes for worker cooperatives. And almost all of them have about a $300 cap, but here in California, there's a $1,000 cap for member investments and contributions, which has been really cool and has inspired, some cool projects to come into existence. In California, it's also, if you want to have the word cooperative in your name, it's important to, highly consider forming under the Cooperative Statute, because if you are not, legally, you can't have the word cooperative in your name. And the great things about the Cooperative Statute and the Corporations Code is that it has some mandatory provisions like one member, one vote, a lot of process and making sure that the members are adequately accounted for, and that the business can't be basically undersold from under them as they're going on. There's some built-in non-extractive financial measures allowing for, or making sure that cooperatives aren't exporting more than 15% of their return into capital investments. But also making sure that folks are able to receive patronage based on the amount that they're working, or the amount that the benefit that they've put into the business and the value they've generated. I mentioned briefly that there's a securities exemption here in California, up to $1,000 per person for members of cooperatives that are inputting investments. And so that gives cooperatives, kind of a leg up in some ways in terms of getting capital, especially if you have developed a strong community base and there are folks there ready and willing to support the work that you're doing and put some money in towards that end. Because there's an exemption here at the state level, that means there's also, well, it doesn't necessarily always mean that, but there isn't a federal or a state notice registration requirement for this, which makes it which makes the burden for raising securities a lot less than for other types of entity choices. I think I was just talking about this. Okay, so some of the things that, in terms of definitions for what a worker cooperative is, and the, let me see, what am I trying to say here? I think I've already said this. Okay, I'm gonna move forward. So when you're planning your business, starting your cooperative and trying to figure out, well, I'm sorry. I keep wanting to go outside the scope of this presentation. Subchapter T is Subchapter T is what you'll be opting into when you become a cooperative corporation and you inform the IRS what you're up to. And that will allow for a cooperative to also save some taxes on the money that they're passing on to their members in the form of patronage. So another benefit that cooperative corporations can take with them. And unlike like public benefit corporations, nonprofits really, cooperatives can do almost anything. You can engage in any lawful activity. There's a current trend of arts nonprofits figuring out how to become cooperatives. And that's because for the most part, like people will donate even though they don't get a tax exempt donation because of the 501c3 status that comes with a public benefit corporation. But the ability to not be restricted in the activities that you can do, I think is what a lot of people are seeking to move towards. As a nonprofit, someone has to, well, the organization has to ensure that their like public charity status isn't revoked because of having too many unrelated business income or having too much lobbying or whatever it is. So a lot of people are moving in this direction, or a lot of organizations, and it's been really exciting to witness. So when you're thinking of, okay, so these are the steps, and I think we're close to done. I may have slid through these faster than I thought. You're gonna wanna choose your business name. You can go to the Secretary of State's website and like do some business searches as well as reserving your name just to make sure it's available for when you're ready. It's a good practice to prepare your bylaws or your operating agreement before filing with the Secretary of State. Once you file with the Secretary of State, you have about 90 days to file a statement of information, letting them know who your officers are, your board, and any and who will be like receiving legal mail. Let's see. When filing the articles of incorporation, you'll also need to make sure to have like board resolutions ready, so that you're starting to get into your corporate minutes and records and things like that. Having record of everyone first assenting to starting the corporation and moving forward. After you incorporate, you're going to want to make sure to get your EIN with the IRS, sign up with the different state agencies that regulate like businesses as well as employers. Opening the bank account, obtaining the necessary licenses. I think there's a local site called Cal Gold, which will help you in terms of searching the type of business you're doing, and they'll let you know the permits or licenses you should be considering. Implementing operational and management structure is number 9 in this, but I think it should be closer to number 1, especially if you're starting to do the work right away and doing the work as you're figuring out like what your ultimate or maybe your first draft of your governance documents will be. And I'm glad that this series has a segment on that, because I think, I mean, even cooperatives that have been around for years are working, figuring out how to do it best, because there's no necessarily right way. We all have a different way of coming into the work and participating. And so like figuring out the ways that people within the cooperative keep themselves accountable and keep others accountable. It's really important, and really, I think, something you should be sure to put time and attention into. And so a lot of this stuff is kind of complicated sometimes. And so when you're thinking about, which entity should I choose between like a sole proprietor and a partnership, something that, you can kind of just run with right away and the law will automatically ascribe some stuff to you, or whether or not you want to, do a limited liability company or some kind of corporation. Those are things an attorney can talk with you about and talk with you through. The Resilient Communities Legal Cafe is a great place to come and talk with attorneys or volunteers who have that expertise and show up. I think it's 2 or 3 times a month to support folks. When drafting or amending bylaws and operating agreements, it's often good to start on your own, but also come and make sure that the things you all are preparing are in line with the law or don't conflict with the law. Employment law, it is what it is. If you need support with it, because it can be like burdensome and a little, I'll just say that that's something to talk with an attorney about, as well as key contracts. When seeking loans, having someone read through the investments to make sure that you're not giving away too much in terms of legal rights. When a member leaves or when selling or terminating the co-op, that's also a good time to talk with an attorney. They can help you make sure that your bylaws or your company policies accurately account for what needs to happen or what should or has happened. And if not, can probably help you all move through that process easily. Resources for moving forward when doing this development process. The city of Santa Clara and Robin is increasingly becoming somewhere to go and get support. Cooplaw.org, the Think Outside the Box manual, and tons of other templates are available for you all. I've given shout outs to the Resilient Communities Legal Cafe many times. Project Equity, Democracy at Work, and the California Cooperative Development Center are all great partner organizations where you can go and get like top-notch support in terms of building a cooperative or converting a cooperative. And the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives has new co-op clinics for folks. So whether you're here or somewhere else, they'll be able to support you with many of the things that we talked about in this presentation. Yeah, I saw in the chat that I went like a lot faster than my run through suggested I would, I guess. When I'm a little nervous, I speak in double time. But if I'm happy to like answer questions, speak through anything that could use some more clarity.
As we give folks the opportunity to sort of reflect and come up with their questions, Gregory, are there any areas that you feel like you breezed over that deserve a little more breaking down, or any additional comments you want to return to?
It seemed, sorry. It seems like there's always more to talk about, but it's usually like case or context specific. And so I'm happy to like, talk about examples of, past work in terms of like starting these things, creating these things. I don't know, it's simple and it's complex. It's simple because like we kind of know the things that have to be in these articles of incorporation and like either bylaws or operating agreement. Your articles have to list who the members are or how many members there will be, what kinds of categories of members, and essentially like if you're indemnifying folks and who's going to accept legal mail if something has to come through. Your bylaws or operating agreement, on the other hand, are going to be getting like more into the weeds on, okay, like we have maybe 5 categories of members, or maybe we just have one, worker co-op or worker owners, or maybe we have worker owners and the community investor class. Here in California, I mentioned we have like this really awesome cooperative statute. I think we're one of the only states where there's a vehicle for folks to place $1,000 in cooperatives that they are aligned with and want to see succeed without actually being hands-on in the day-to-day aspects and governance. And really, if a cooperative decides to just go with the minimum in terms of what the state requires between a cooperative and that community investor, the community investor could, receive a modest return on what they've invested, that $1,000, and would have, I guess, veto rights or voting rights on only major decisions like dissolution or, things like that, like winding up the company, something that would, definitely affect their share. Otherwise, the cooperative and its owners, other owners, are allowed to, just steward the project as they see fit. And so, yeah, like whether someone's creating like a consumer cooperative, a producer co-op, a worker co-op, or housing co-op, or an electric co-op, some kind of a mutual aid society. I think, when we like break everything down to its essence, it's all kind of the same. And, we talk about the members and the board of directors and how meetings work and how decisions are made, and how finances move through the cooperative in those like formative agreements. But each group of people are going to need a different thing or want a different thing. And it's rare that a person like picks up a off-the-shelf bylaws and just runs with that without knowing they're going to change it down the line.
That's great. Thanks, Gregory. We got a question from Kirk saying, can you share the kinds of services that the Sustainable Economies Law Center offers, including introductory consulting and any resources that you provide to ask questions?
Yeah. I might need you to help me out with this, Yasi, because I know you're involved heavily in like the political advocacy arena. I've been involved in the cooperative, like worker and housing cooperative spaces, but there's also the Nonprofit Democracy Network. There is the self-directed retirement savings plans, the Next Egg, that our coworkers are working on. I think I think some of our coworkers also began organizing community-based organizations and technical assistance providers to try and like get the top bid for the general plan that's being created in Oakland. Some of our coworkers have helped start cooperatives like People Power Solar or the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. Others of our coworkers are like supporting like the Black Cultural Zone as client work, or homefulness, or Native Indigenous tribes. And so there's just like such a range that we get to experience at the Law Center. And it's all surrounding like how do people come together and interface in generative ways with both like ourselves and with the world. And so it's really like, I think you can find almost anything you're looking for inside of the sub.org's website. In addition to like Co-op Palooza, which is going on this month, I'm sorry, in a few months. This month is Interdependence Month, which has had some awesome speakers and more to come. And so there's always really great like written information, video information, and all kinds of things coming out of the Law Center and what we're doing.
I'm going to jump in here and toss you another question, Greg. There's a lot lighting up the chat, which is great. The next question someone asked is, how long does it take to set up a sole proprietorship in California? Is it a lot of boilerplate forms, or is each unique in terms of filing and setting up?
So in California, unless you want to do a DBA, a doing business as, as long as you're saying like, for me, it would be like, this is Gregory's consulting business. As soon as I say I'm doing business as Gregory's consulting business, I've got a sole proprietorship. You don't got to do anything else. And the same is true for a partnership. If like you and I are like, hey, we're gonna do, GNX's consultancy firm, we've got a partnership right there without doing much more. Now we can create those background documents and things, but essentially, once you start doing business as a sole proprietor, your obligation is to report that income to the IRS and to the state.
Great, thanks. And the next question someone brought is more broad, so maybe they can clarify in the chat, but they were asking, are there resources available in Spanish? And I think this kind of question kind of came up when you were answering the question about services that SELC offers. So maybe you could talk about any Spanish resources we have or any Spanish resources for people who are trying to set up co-ops in general.
Yeah, definitely. And so the LLC Operating Agreement manual that I mentioned is one of the things that has also been translated into Spanish. I'm sorry, can someone mute? I'm having a hard time hearing. So last year, some of our interns started translating more of our materials into Spanish. I'm not quite sure how far that has gotten. I think it might be good to email me or someone else if you're seeking something in particular and we can support you. There's also an organization called Prospera. I believe they're located in the Fruitvale district of Oakland. And that is a primarily Spanish-speaking cooperative development organization that has often focused on women and supporting them in getting their cooperatives off the ground.
Thanks, Gregory. More questions. Before jumping into an existing worker-owned business, do you have advice? Wait 1 second. Do you have advice for new members on how to protect folks from liability or offer financial insights?
So for new people coming into an existing cooperative?
Let's see. I'm just reading the question here. Advice for new members on how to protect folks from liability.
Okay. So for a new member coming into a cooperative or collective, the first thing that's going to protect people in terms of liability is maintaining your minutes and records and being compliant in terms of taxes or whatever. Just making sure that the corporate shield you've created in terms of that entity is in good standing. Another way to reduce liability in terms of what you're personally liable for is to make sure that the cooperative has insurance, so that if something goes wrong, an insurance company is the one helping to pay the bills rather than having to come out of you or the co-op's pocket. There are certain clauses that you'll want to make sure are in either your articles of incorporation or your bylaws operating agreement in terms of indemnification and indemnifying workers, members, board members, and those kinds of things. And so, yeah, those are some of the things you're going to want to do to make sure, as a new member coming in, that you're not exposing yourself to a bunch of liability. Yeah, but if that doesn't totally answer your question, please, let us know.
Great, thanks, Gregory. More questions for you. What opportunities do you think exist or could exist to aggregate healthcare plans for co-ops?
Healthcare plans. I believe the US Federation has been looking into starting that kind of healthcare plan for cooperatives. I think it's gonna take like having a pre-existing market, or like folks kind of like pre-signing up, letting a provider know that you know, there's this big group of folks who are looking to get insurance, and you know, that's kind of what the government's trying to do with the government exchange anyway. So yeah, that's as far as I know in terms of like what co-ops are doing to try and get insurance between, you know, other co-ops. I also wanted to give a shout out to, I didn't catch you put this in here, but someone put into the chat that the LA Co-op Lab also has courses in Spanish. And the LA Co-op Lab has like really awesome courses. I've only checked out the English versions, but they're about $50 and they'll walk you through a lot of the things you'll need to know in terms of like starting the cooperative, doing some of the management, governance stuff, as well as like the people stuff needed. So thank you for that. Yes, there's also free ones too. Ji Young, thank you.
Great, thanks. Another question that came up is it possible to change types of entities? Is it a pain? For example, starting as a partnership and then switching to an LLC?
Yeah, depending on, you know, what's going on with that switch, it could be just, you know, doing some forms, talking with attorney, or yeah, probably attorneys and CPAs to make sure like, you know, the taxes and all of that thing are together in that switch. But, you know, the Secretary of State does have like conversion forms on their website. The sticky thing about like conversions, especially if like someone's like selling their business and is being converted to a co-op, is that there's this like evaluation process, or I'm using the wrong term, but there's this process for like valuating how much the business is worth, and then you know, and that helping to structure, you know, the way the conversion happens. So like the paperwork and stuff, you know, could be like, you know, easy to challenging, well, it's not super challenging, but the valuation part is what takes a lot of time. In addition to, you know, trying to do all of the other streams of a conversion at the same time. If it's just the same people seeking to go from one entity type, let's say a partnership, into an LLC, it can be much smoother, but there are some things you'll want to like check in with an attorney or a CPA about.
Great, thanks, Gregory. The last question that we had in the chat is a little bit more focused on housing, which isn't particularly part of this webinar, but we do have some extra time. So unless anybody else has any questions, are you cool if we kind of go towards this? A question about funding for housing cooperatives.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So this person says, I understand there are some SEC protections already for aggregating investors for real estate projects. Is there an additional advantage by incorporating as a cooperative corporation?
It sounds like this person has probably started to read the 1933 and 1934 Securities Acts. I don't quite remember the names. But I would say that here in California, there is, you know, some advantages to doing that in terms of, I believe that, you know, folks need to incorporate like cooperative principles from the beginning, and like figure out ways to like hold those, even though it may be more work at times, as opposed to, I don't know, building structures that aren't quite aligned and then trying to get us there nonetheless. all of it is needed. But I would say that okay, so I'm recognizing that I was telling on myself when in the earlier part of the presentation, I was saying, you know, sometimes lawyers won't give yes or no answers or feeling wishy-washy. And it really depends on like the ultimate purpose of what this organization is trying to do and whether they want to go along the lines of some kind of like real estate trust or real estate conglomeration, rather like along the lines of those like exceptions in those acts, rather than as a cooperative, which has like, you know, its own exceptions. And, you know, I think there's something to be said or some research to be done on whether, you know, they can be done synonymously or, you know, work in concert.
Great, thank you for that, Gregory. Another question that just got dropped in the chat is, could you also share about how an LLC would still operate as a co-op? Would that mainly be a question of how operations and governance are handled?
Yes, mainly. There's going to be some provisions that you're going to want within your operating agreement for this LLC, making sure that there's one member, one vote. People are receiving you know, patronage based on the amounts of participation that they had within the corporation or cooperative, or well, this would be an LLC, so I'll say the company. Yeah, when talking with an attorney to make sure that all that's needed for the Subchapter T side, you know, I'm sorry I can't speak to like everything that's needed, but those are like the top 2 things that the IRS is looking for in terms of proof that a business is operating cooperatively. And then once that happens, there is an ability for the members to receive some tax breaks on the patronage dividends. Instead of there being like double taxation, once on the organization and once on the member, there's only one taxation.
Got it. So I believe that is the end of the questions that have been dropped in the chat. If anybody has any other questions, we welcome you to drop them in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask in these last few minutes. Anything else you want to offer up to the group, Gregory, before we, while we wait for more questions?
You know, big shout out to public banks. I think it's definitely necessary to get the well, to get the people to be able to control the purse strings. Also, shout out to credit unions, which are cooperative financial institutions. Yeah, I don't know. I hope that, you know, this was helpful and that in your journey to create a cooperative or maybe convert something into a cooperative, that this, you know, has led you in the right direction. The Resilient Community Legal Cafes are always a place to come. There's always like a wealth of knowledge and expertise there. And yeah, just thank you so much for taking time today.
And I want to close this out by saying we did record this webinar, and for those of you who RSVP'd, we can send a follow-up email with a link to the recording. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining.